on the sports talk TV show Skip and Shannon Undisputed. And you guys probably know what I'm talking about, but let's go ahead and roll the clip here. But essentially, Skip Bayless and Jenny Taft, who's the host of the show, or the hostess, are going to get into it here, and it's following a conversation about the Dallas Cowboys, who are featured in this year's HBO series Hard Knocks, which is, of course, an inside look at their training camp. Gives you an under-the-hood look at practice, at all the coaches' speeches, and in this case, it's their head coach, Mike McCarthy, who is giving a speech, and then Skip and Shannon are going to critique that speech on Undisputed on the show. So, like I said, this is sports talk TV. This is very normal. So I'm going to go ahead and roll the clip. Let's get into it.
Or didn't think he could get out of himself.
Yeah.
That's what the really good ones can do.
And
Man,
again,
you think I get excited to play for him, Skip?
No. And again, this is just personal preference on my part. I'm not taking a shot at him about this, but he's a little heavy, and I wouldn't want my head coach in the National Football League to not look the part at all, because you got to stay in some semblance of condition to show that you know who you are and what you have some confidence in yourself, right?
Man,
it's just unimpressive across the board. I'm giving him no check marks, right?
No.
So as you can see, Skip and Shannon, they're the two debaters on the show. They're going back and forth, and they actually agree with each other in this case, which they don't often do, that Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys head coach, delivered a pretty lackluster speech in the show. They're talking about how he's kind of not fit to be a leader. And at the end of the segment there, which is the key, Skip actually goes as far to say that McCarthy is out of shape. He actually treads very lightly. He says, this is a personal preference. I'm not taking a shot at him. He's a little heavy. I just wouldn't want him as my head coach because you have to stay in some semblance of condition. And he was just unimpressive across the board, right? That's pretty tame criticism of a guy who is very obviously obese, right? Objectively. But notice how Shannon's head turns right when the heavy comment is made by Skip, because he's looking right at the moderator, the hostess, Jenny Taft, who is obviously already indicating her disdain for this comment.
Not taking a shot at him about this, but he's a little heavy, and I wouldn't want my head coach in the National Football League to not look the part at all, because you got to stay in some semblance of condition
to show that you know who you are, which you have some.
Shannon kind of turns his head as if somebody's kind of making a face at him. It's obviously Jenny. That's the only other person on the panel next to him. So, again, let's be real. Skip is calling a spade here. Mike McCarthy's always been heavy, spanning back to his days in Green Bay with the Packers when he won the Super Bowl, that sort of has kept him afloat as a head coach in the league. But as a fitness guy, as a certified fitness professional who trains people for a living, I noticed these things. And even last year in Dallas, I noticed that McCarthy had gotten even fatter. I mean, that's objectively not a good thing. So let's be clear here. What Skip says is he's a little heavy. Mike McCarthy is undoubtedly classified as obese, which is objectively a very bad thing. So, also you got to keep in mind, Skip Bayless is paid and exists to say things that generate a reaction. He is a heel for our wrestling fans in the sports television business, and he's very good at it. I think it's great because I always enjoyed the heel in pro wrestling. So, the fact that he says things to generate heat, basically, again, to use wrestling terms, but he's saying these things to elicit a reaction among sports fans. Now, to be fair and play the devil's advocate a little bit, sure, there are plenty of successful coaches like Andy Reid, for example, of the Kansas City Chiefs, who are very heavy and are quite successful and respected by their players, obviously. So certainly their weight isn't the only metric by which a player respects their coach. anyone who's played sports, we probably have all had a coach that was out of shape. But undoubtedly, he has a point also. And the reason I even say that is because it's proven he has a point, because this actually just recently happened elsewhere in the country. So before we go into this whole meltdown situation with Jenny Taft that's about to happen as the clip progresses, let's shift our Sauron's eye of social justice.
For Sauron will have dominion over all life on this earth, even unto the ending of the world.
To a similar situation in Oxford, Mississippi, with the Ole Miss Rebels. College football. Their head coach is Lane Kiffin. So any of you sports fans who know Lane Kiffin, obviously was the youngest coach in NFL history with the Raiders, bounced around to Tennessee, to USC, did some time with Nick Saban in Alabama, and then kind of got himself back into the head coaching gigs with Florida Atlantic, and then ultimately with the Ole Miss Rebels, which is where he's kind of relanded in the SEC and is getting a new start. So that's not as relevant to the article that I'm about to reference, which I'll go ahead and pull up here. Here it is. Ole Miss Rebels football coach Lane Kiffin preaching accountability to team after losing 30 pounds in offseason. Oh my God. What a terrible thing to say, right? Look at him. He says, I saw a picture of me at the bowl game last year and told the players I looked like an anaconda that had swallowed a deer and the deer got stuck in its neck. That's Lane Kiffin's quote. So, obviously, he was not pleased with his condition, and anyone who had watched Lane Kiffin could tell he was getting fatter. It says at one point he got up to 245, which wouldn't even be necessarily classified as morbidly obese. Even at his largest, Lane Kiffin was in no way the same size as Mike McCarthy. But here's the quote that really matters in the context of what I'm trying to say. So, Matt Corral, who's their starting quarterback at Ole Miss, Heisman candidate next year, we really saw his weight change, Corral said. He dropped a lot of weight since January, and as players and seeing him go through that process, it just makes us more disciplined and helps us buy into the values and principles of the organization. Matt Corral and Lane Kiffin, two insensitive bigots who are body shaming. No, they're not. Okay? Anyone who has any respect for fitness and understands its importance, especially as it relates to sports, can look at a person who's in great shape. It's an automatic indicator that they take that part seriously. And as a head coach who is bringing wisdom and knowledge and commanding the respect of grown-ass men in the NFL, Skip has a point, right? So this is going to be fitness trainer Colton coming at you right now. But we know for a fact 1 in 4 deaths in the United States every year, 650,000 people, is due to heart disease, which in large part is the result of unhealthy eating and consequently being overweight. It isn't widely advertised, but it should be also, that a huge percentage of COVID deaths have occurred in those who are overweight or obese. There's unquestionably greater risk to you in that state. So what I'm arguing is, the point Skip is making is sound. It's objectively not a good thing to be overweight or obese like Mike McCarthy is. I shouldn't even have to say this. This is the type of stuff that you literally have to spell out or people will totally lose their minds, right? And the truth is, he lightly touched on it. He made a whole bunch of other points in a 10-minute segment, and then he lightly goes in on the fact that, yeah, he's a little heavy. I don't know if I'd respect that or I'd want him to be my coach. He didn't come off the top rope on McCarthy like he could have. Like I maybe even have. Certainly not as bad as what I've said, which is that he's objectively obese, which isn't even bad to say, it's just the truth. But we don't deal in reality in today's society. It's the battle between rationalism and emotionalism. And that stems from the differences between men and women. And this is where we get into the hot water subject, right? Where it gets a little bit more touchy. But what Skip said, let's back it up, is nothing out of bounds from the things normally said on the show. But here's where it goes wrong. So right after he says that, the female host of the show, Jenny Taft, the moderator, who's there to moderate the debate between Skip and Shannon, she jumps right down his throat. And it starts with this little jab at Skip's comment. Well, let's roll the clip first. Let's go ahead and show you.
Ooh, boy, it's going to be a long one here today.
Yep.
And then I got to hear that. Boy, Coach, you need to motivate me, Coach. You got it hot out
I
here
don't
today.
know
100
if
degrees.
his motivational speech was the most inspiring, but criticizing his appearance, I don't know if I think that is a fair shot for Mike McCarthy. I'm going to leave it at that. Chris Broussard.
Thanks, Jenny. I appreciate that.
I don't think it is a fair shot.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's a fair shot.
Is
either.
everyone
That's
who's
my
a
opinion.
good coach as fit as you, Skip? I don't think that's a fair shot whatsoever.
I wouldn't want. I said it was a personal preference,
I've
and I
actually
wouldn't
had
want him
plenty
to
of
be my
coaches
head coach.
that have not had the
Yeah.
perfect ideal physique, including
Yeah.
my college coach. So I don't think that's a fair shot.
Okay.
And I'm allowed
Next.
to have an opinion,
Yep.
Skip. I am allowed to say whatever I want to say on this show, as you do too.
We're
Chris
the team.
Broussard
We're the team.
will join us and
no.
to Westbrook.
So the first jab is it's not fair. It's not a fair shot to judge his appearance, right? When we just read an article, or we just heard an article and a quote from Matt Corral on his own coach, where a player clearly states that the result in his coach's improved health is a more disciplined team that buys into the values of the organization. Unquestionably a good thing, and exactly what Skip and Shannon are talking about with Mike McCarthy and his inability to do. So to make the comment about the weight based on the evidence of other programs where that's obviously working, it stands to reason that Mike McCarthy not being obese certainly wouldn't hurt him in commanding the respect of his players, which he seems to be struggling to do. Right? And so after she says it's not a fair shot, Skip makes his retort and says her comment isn't a fair shot. It's his opinion. He wouldn't want him as a coach. And this is where she completely loses it, right? This lights the whole thing on fire. You strike the emotional chord, and we go off the deep end. And this is where you see the real clash between rationalism and emotionalism. What's objective truth and fact, and what something makes me feel. And this actually shows, this clip, and this was exactly what I thought the first time I watched it, shows a huge difference between men and women. This isn't a bad thing. This isn't to disparage women or lift men up. This is to show you the way that we communicate is different. We're not the same, no matter how much the great Sauron eye of social justice and feminism and all that want us to be the same. We are wired to communicate differently. This proves it. But there are actually fMRI brain studies that I can show you that prove this as well. But it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Because the lay of the land is, and like I said, dealing in reality, the reality is we live in a society that prioritizes the female experience. So you must lead with emotion. That's touted as correct, which is exactly why after this clip came out, you had the Yas Queen army on Twitter totally coming unglued at Skip Bayless and praising Jenny Taft to the heavens. Because that's the correct experience to them, right? And to a lot of men too. Because they've recognized that, oh, this is the way we're supposed to do it. So yay, Jenny Taft, right? Even though an objective truth has been stated that I just backed up with another college program, we're still going to lose our minds completely. The emotions are what mattered. And this is exactly it's the same reason you won't ever see CNN come out and tell you that if you're obese, you should probably not be because you're at a markedly higher risk of COVID. But we're not going to say that. That doesn't make us feel good, right? That's body shaming. Skip Bayless is body shaming Mike McCarthy for being an objectively unhealthy person with a massive risk of early death, and which he didn't even say. I'm the one saying it. But with all that known, maybe it's a little harder, or it plays against him in demanding the respect of his players, which is something that's going to be very important for the Cowboys this season, which was the whole point of the debate and the conversation between Skip and Shannon. But it's very important that we pay attention here, because Jenny takes huge offense to Skip's pushback. And immediately, is everyone who's a coach as fit as you, Skip? Which is classic emotionally driven technique. Basically to say what Skip's saying is that all coaches have to be in excellent shape. Obviously, that's not what he's saying. Jenny knows this deep down. And if you've ever actually taken a debate class, you know this is a horrible debate tactic. This is something they tell you not to do, but which is basically embellishing the other person's perspective and talking in extremes as if that's what they're doing, when it's clearly not, to the person watching it from a rational perspective. But then we get I know plenty of coaches who who don't have the ideal physique, and that includes my college coach, and I'm allowed to have an opinion, right?
Okay.
And I'm allowed to have an opinion,
Yep.
Skip. I am allowed to say whatever I want to say on this show.
My experience is the right one. The feminine experience, that's the right one. You're out of line, Skip. And if you don't agree, you're suppressing my opinion, which not only makes you wrong, but also a bigot. Because now you're suppressing women's opinions. And why is that? Why is that the narrative? And everyone on Twitter took it and ran with it. Everyone loved it. Yes, Queen. Put him in his place. Show him the right way. Because we live in a society where that's the truth. That's the reality we live in. It's just a fact. And this is keeping in mind that Jenny is the moderator of the show. She's supposed to keep the conversation flowing and ask the questions. Her opinion isn't suppressed, but it's literally Skip and Shannon's jobs to debate the topics at hand. Hence the name of the show, Skip and Shannon Undisputed. Now, was her giving her opinion out of line? I don't necessarily think so. But her reaction to Skip's retort baited him into a situation that could have ended very, very badly. And I actually want to say I applaud Skip for shutting it down after that, after the I'm allowed to have an opinion comment, because that's when you just walked into the minefield of social justice. You just walked into no man's land at the border of friggin' North Korea, and you have about 50 marksmen aiming right at you. And if you make one wrong step, your career is toast. That right there, him taking the high road at that point and going to commercial break, is the difference between having to deal with one Jamel Hill subtweet and an entire slander campaign on social media that results in you losing your job. He had no choice but to shut it down. He did the right thing. He gave his opinion. The second it struck an emotional chord, and the end was near. And you can even see this in Shannon's face if you watch the clip back. We'll play it again.
I'm allowed to say whatever I want to say on this show, as you do too.
We're the team.
You can see and hear Shannon say, hey, come on, guys, right after the I'm allowed to have an opinion. Because at the end of the day, Shannon knows just as well as I do exactly what's happening, just as well as Skip does. And he just saw his partner on the show walk into no man's land in North Korea and heard the 50 snipers on the wall load their guns. And he knows what happens next. Hey, come on, guys. Let's back it down. We're a team. let's not push this any further. And luckily, because Skip is a smart guy, he holds his tongue on national TV, or it would have been his ass big time. So what's the point of all this, and why is it important? To the people listening to this podcast, the men especially, you need to know the lay of the land. And you need to understand this is the perfect example of what I tell you guys. Men and women communicate differently. We are not the same. The way we're expected to carry ourselves today, proven by this clip and the reaction to it, emotions first. Emote. Rationalism, bad. If it goes against how it makes somebody feel, even if it's an objective truth. And this is a small example of that. And we can talk about it on a much larger scale and why that's a problem. But I'm on here to make you guys aware of these situations, to be aware of the false crap that we're pushed, really from the time, especially people my age and young people, from the time of adolescence, how dangerous they are. Because you may end up in a similar situation one day. I hope you play it as well as Skip did. Because if you don't, there's 50 snipers on the top of the North Korean wall aimed right at you. And if you make a wrong step, it's game over. So I'm the one who's going to tell you that uncomfortable truth, of course.